The Ghost in the Shell franchise first began as a manga by Masamune Shirow, published in 1989. 30 years later, and we've been graced with a multitude of different adaptations from TV to movies. But recently, the brand began to die down, with the poor reception to the most recent show Arise in 2013, and Ghost in the Shell the New Movie in 2015. In order to rejuvenate the brand and introduce it to a wider audience, Paramount created an American adaptation directed by Rupert Sanders and starring the iconic lead Motoko Kusanagi inside the body of Scarlett Johansson. My biggest problem with Ghost in the Shell 2017 is the writing. By far, it's the most glaring issue when re-watching it. The term Americanized is often used to describe it, but let's use the proper terms. Dumbed down. Visually, the movie is a technical masterpiece, except for the questionable attempt to make Scarlett Johansson look like an anime character. The blend between practical and visual effects works seamlessly, and the city feels full of life and energy, which effectively contrasts with the dull performance. Scenes from the 1995 movie are perfectly recreated shot for shot, including the jump, the water fight, the diving scene, and of course the spider tank sequence. These are arguably the most iconic moments from the original, so it makes sense to recreate these scenes so a new audience can appreciate the impressive visuals, while also allowing previous fans to see some of their favourite moments in live action. But here's the problem. Context. Yes, these scenes are all here, but in almost all of them, they're in a completely different context to how they were intended. A common criticism of Zack Snyder's Watchmen was that it appeared as if Zack simply recreated the graphic novel's panels and words with 100% accuracy without knowing what any of it meant. Now, in the case of Watchmen, I do disagree with this, but that argument can be made quite effectively for this film. The perfect example of this is in my favourite scene from the original film, which is recreated here in the American version. That being the garbage truck man being told that he'd been cyber-hacked. Let's break down why the original works and the remake doesn't. In the 1995 film, Section 9 isn't hunting down an actual person, but a sentient AI called the Puppet Master, created during a test by Section 6 to hack into people's brains and control their intelligence. Section 6 used this ability to cyber-hack the mind of an innocent garbage truck driver and his friend into doing industrial espionage without even realising it. This leads to a shootout and an escape, but also leads into an incredibly moving scene in which the man is lit by only a small lamp and is told that his entire life was a lie, that false memories had been implanted. This is all achieved with a simple reaction shot and a photograph. The emotion is felt through the man's expression, his complete mental break, as he realises even the contents of his flat were a lie. The scene beforehand showed how proud he was of his family, and how happy and cheerful he was, and how satisfied with the simple mundane life he had. But now it had been reduced to nothing. He is a shell, with no soul, no ghost, nothing. It's the perfect scene, and helps to make you feel the emotional stakes of the story in less than 2 minutes. Now we get to this mess. Remember when I said that this movie was visually stunning? Well, that becomes a serious problem in a scene like this. Okay, so we find out that a physical guy called Kuze, this already makes a lot less sense, hacks the garbage truck guy. There is one brief line of dialogue about him having a daughter, which is not expanded upon at all, and I had to rewatch the scene 3 times to notice it. So we as the audience just don't care about this guy. The shootout and the water fight take place, and then we have the same reveal that the man had no family, but from inside a huge glass box with restraints, and is told in an aggressive manner, which almost makes the guy look more stupid than sympathetic as he waddles around the box. Along with the photo of himself being shown as a hologram that is moving so much, I genuinely think it would be difficult for people to tell who the photo is of. The hologram is unnecessary, and makes the scene more complex looking than it needs to be. The moment should be intimate, and he certainly shouldn't be moving around. He should be frozen in fear, but he panics and shouts so overdramatically, it makes the moment so much less convincing, and it's a real shame, because it's a fantastic set, and the actor is doing his best with the space given, but the scene really isn't given the attention it needed to be successful. As it stands, the whole 8-minute scene could be cut from the film and you'd lose nothing. The only thing you learn in the scene is that Kuze is tracking down Hanker scientists, but this is shown in the first 30 seconds. Now I think it's time to mention Blade Runner, because yeah, this film is very clearly trying to outdo it. In terms of the cyberpunk aesthetic, Blade Runner had huge advertisements on screens the size of buildings. The city shone with a harsh neon light, and the constant rain set the mood of a 1920s detective mystery, because that's exactly what it was. The film was slow, and let you soak in the look and feel of the world. It evoked the best use of cyberpunk as a technological step ahead, but in a crime-ridden city that looked as if it had seen better days, and the world felt lived in. Ghost in the Shell has more advertisements, more holograms, more neon, more moving logos, and little CG arrows and lines, and people moving through the screen, which just clutters up the image, especially during the daytime sequences. The image just looks so flat, and I'm confused as to why they went in this direction. The original had neon, but not like this. It was dark and grimy, with rundown parts of town and high-rise buildings, but always a bleak look, like the world had been left behind by its advancements in technology. It makes more thematic sense. Now the style they were going for can work. Let's look at the Netflix show Altered Carbon, which screams cyberpunk, but in an interesting concept, not too dissimilar to this film. An Asian person wakes up inside a white person. However, Altered Carbon did not present this as a controversial twist ending, but it was the premise. A man that is leading a second chance in a world he doesn't recognise. The reason the over-the-top neon works in Altered Carbon is because it shows the confusion and overwhelming nature of the world the protagonist has been thrown into. But in Ghost in the Shell, no one bats an eyelid. When I see this, how am I meant to feel? I would have thought awe and wonder, but the characters certainly don't seem very interested. And now we get to the villain. Hands down the weakest part of the script. The villain is a twist. It's surprisingly not the scary deformed robot, no, it's the corporate businessman. I don't know which is worse. Honestly, just making the villain a guy who is barely in the film shows it was clearly an afterthought. The film was probably just looking for a sequel, so it wanted to flesh out Section 9 more than the actual villain. Reusing the spider tank is an incredibly lazy move as well. It had no reason to be there. In the original, it blows up the Tree of Life and destroys all preconceptions of nature and reproduction. It proves with force technology is the next step in evolution, just by destroying a mural in a museum. But here, the tank is simply a tank. The CG is quite poor, and it's always shrouded in darkness, which makes it difficult to see, unless you know what it's meant to look like. I'd argue the villain is the most important part of the original film, as it makes you start to think. When I finished watching the 1995 film for the first time, I was admittedly a bit lost. Where was the villain being defeated? Where was the conclusion? Everything is left so ambiguous that I needed to watch the film again straight after, just to try and understand all of the intricacies. Whereas this film leaves you feeling like you very unambiguously wasted your time on what is really a simple plot, made more complicated with twists and turns that try to have the same impact as the original, but without the deeper layers or interesting characters that we actually like. My favourite character in the film was Aramaki, simply for that rabbit and fox line, since it was delivered so much better than everything else in the film. I'm betting it was probably improv. The scene has no CG billboards, no crazy effects, just a car and an actor allowed to do his thing. Ultimately, this film just fell to the wayside. The box office wasn't particularly impressive, and coming out in the same year as Blade Runner 2049 meant that it definitely wasn't the best cyberpunk film of the year. Which sort of leaves it in an odd situation. There is definitely heart and attention put into it, but also some terrible mistakes and I'm guessing corporate politics that led it to being a bit more of a shallow, dull recreation of the original with some elements of standalone complex and Arise thrown in there. And it's a shame too. because while the visuals of this film are absolutely gorgeous, they lack purpose.